for next week. So, okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Recreational Amenities Study on the Erie Canal, also known as the Amenities Study, as it is kind of a mouthful. We're excited to share the findings with all of you and for all of you to see what's happening on a broader scale, to be able to see what the trail looks like on a regional level, and then also take back ideas and recommendations so that you can prioritize future investments for your own communities. The study was a joint effort between Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor and the New York State Canal Corporation, with funding from the Canal Corporation and the Department of Environmental Conservation's Mohawk River Basin Program. Due to funding and staffing and not being able to, take on more than we could manage, we only studied the land and water trails on the Erie. But it is the plan and intent to study the Cayuga-Seneca, Champlain, and Oswego Canal amenities at a future date. We also partnered with Colliers Engineering and Design, and they conducted the study. They did a fantastic job. You'll be hearing from Leanne in just a moment. But we'll start with some introductions. My name is Mona Karen. I'm the Director of Trails and Stewardship with the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. We have Sasha and Leanne as co-presenters, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Great.
So Sasha, if you'd like to take it.
Hi, I'm Sasha Del Perel. I'm the trail manager at the New York State Canal Corporation. The New York State Canal Corporation is the state agency responsible for managing and maintaining the canal systems of New York State. But we also have management and maintenance responsibility of about 50% of the land-based trail network. And we've been partnering with Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor now for probably almost 2 decades, and sponsoring programs of theirs, and then also using them to help support programming of New York State Canal Corporation. So we're really excited to be involved in this project. Thank you. Leanne?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Leanne Kimber. As Mona mentioned, I'm with Colliers Engineering and Design. I'm an urban planner by training, and our firm was engaged to conduct this inventory and amenities assessment. So it was really a great experience to work with both Canal Corporation and Erie Canalway, as well as many of you who probably participated in stakeholder interviews along the way. So yeah, great. Really excited to share our findings today.
All right, so here's a look at the agenda. I'll share some background on why we decided to do this study, why it was needed. Leanne will take us through the study, and then Sasha will share information about recently released guiding documents from the Canal Corporation, along with potential funding sources. So if we could move to the next slide. So we decided to study the recreational amenities on the Erie Canal and the Canalway Trail because we've all noticed an increase in visitorship users since the completion of the Empire State Trail. And you add to that the development of the water trail, we're seeing more paddlers, programs like the Canalway Challenge on the canals, and plus, the events and tourism infrastructure grants program. All those things have added to more traffic on the canal, more attention, more awareness. And also many communities are also drawing people for canal-themed events. So we've been also celebrating the bicentennial for the Erie Canal, and this study is very much a forward-looking document to bring us into the next century. With multiple user types of the Erie Canal, Canalway Trail, and the Water Trail, the system has posed a challenge for creating a consistent and predictable experience for all visitors. So this study really considers how to address these challenges for the next century. And it's a tool for project planning, for making improvements on the canal and improving the visitor's experience. So we have a joint vision that we shared in the report. I won't read it off to you, but basically, our vision is to create a world-class destination for recreation on the Erie Canal and the New York State Canal system as a whole. We want to gain recognition as one of the most accessible trails in the nation. And we'd like to evolve from a linear recreation way to a complete network of waterways, parks, and trails. And then finally, create a consistent and predictable experience on the trail. So I'm going to pass it along to Sasha, I believe is next.
Yep.
That's right.
So just one quick note, if you could mute yourself during presentation, and then and if you later on we have questions and answers, that's when you can unmute and ask your questions. All right, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mona. So Mona mentioned this is a big year for the Erie Canal, the bicentennial year, and how this milestone has prompted a lot of thought about what the next century of the canal system will look like, as we kind of transition away from being a waterway of commerce and industry into a recreation way and connective. So in May of this year, the Canal Recreation Way Commission, which was established by law in 1992, released its second Canal Recreation Way plan. And this plan looks forward 25 years, and it sets a long-term framework for improving access, amenities, and experiences along the New York State Canal system, as well as identifying avenues for strategic land use, environmental stewardship, and improved accessibility. The plan seeks to establish the canal system as a sustainable, well-maintained, and connective linear park, right, with those branches out to local parks, municipal parks, state parks, and other waterways. And this plan isn't just for Canal Corporation or other state agencies. It's intended for canal corridor communities, elected officials, business owners, and advocates as well. And the objective of this plan is to help, feed the, continue to feed updates to the canal system and help us also with project planning and visioning for the future. And so this lends itself really well to the work that we've been doing with Colliers and Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor, because amenities, access, connection is certainly a main priority of the 2050 plan, and also the amenity study that was undertaken. So the alignment of the two plans is really great and well timed. And then we can go to the next slide. And the work that we've been also doing over the last year has been feeding off of the 2050 plan and thinking about our public facing lands, and establishing a new identity for our canal property as we envision ourselves more like a park. So if you've been out on the system, which I'm sure all of you have since you're attending this meeting, you'll probably notice that there's 7 different colors you'll see on Canal Corporation property and various logos you'll see. And so to address that, we have updated our canal logos, which we're calling identifiers, as well as our signage design guidelines. And so on the left of your screen, you'll see our new canal identifiers. This includes our site identifier. You'll see that type of signage on our equipment at our lock houses and also waterway signs. And these signs are intended, or new identifiers are intended for Canal Corporation use. So you'll see them on Canal Corporation property. The second, what's below it, is the new trail identifier. And this is the new brand for the Canalway Trail. It's intended for use on all Canalway Trail wayfinding signage, regardless of ownership. So this is a file that will be shared with communities, will be used by communities. It's an identifier for everyone. And then the other component, as you'll see kind of on the right-hand side of your screen, is the wayfinding signage. So providing an updated look that looks more like a park. Consistency, coloration, the new signage design guidelines will give you fonts, layouts, both for wayfinding and interpretive signs. And we have rolled that out. We rolled that out last month. This is intended for, once again, Canal Corporation property and permitted property. So if you're not a owner or maintainer of Canal Corporation land, then you are welcome to use your own coloration and own branding and own signage. But certainly we can welcome you to look at our design guideline as, you know, a template for potential like sustainable material. And, you know, we're always looked at maintenance as a key factor in the types of materials we selected. And then building off of that further, we can go to the next slide. The Canal Corporation also at the same time released our new amenities design standards, and we call this the kit of parts, but this includes new standards for our bike racks, our fix-it stations, water fountains, benches, picnic tables, and once again, these designs were picked with, you know, material longevity, accessibility in mind, and the signage, or excuse me, the amenities design standards include the vendor recommendations on it. And these are, once again, are for Canal Corporation land and permitted land only. So you don't have to comply with these standards if you are not an owner or maintainer of Canal Corporation land. And I want to mention that all these new, the release of these new standards, the intent isn't to go out and replace every sign and every bench that we have on the system. We will be doing this on a rolling basis as things need replacing and as projects come up. So look out for new benches, look out for new signs. We're ordering a bunch of new signs. Actually, they should be coming in the next few weeks, but with these initiatives underway, what better time to have an amenity study to actually recognize like what is out on the system, what's in poor and fair condition, where do we have gaps, and how do we want to fill them? So that leads me to pass it over to Leanne to actually give you what you came here to listen to. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. And Sasha and Mona both did a great job of kind of setting the stage for why a study like this is needed, why the timing aligned so well. I want to, before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what we did and what we recommended or what we found, I just want to sort of further set the stage in identifying who this study is intended for and what it, you know, the purpose that it's intended to serve. We've had a few questions about, you know, is this a wayfinding guide? Is this meant for travel planning? And I just want to be clear that this is primarily a high-level inventory and assessment to aid as a reference for both Erie Canalway, for Canal Corporation, and for anyone really who touches the trail, has a part to play in enhancing the trail system, making it more useful for recreational users and more welcoming to the broader community. This is an excellent tool, guide, resource, reference that can help you identify where amenities, whether it's on your property or property that you're close to, are needed. I think Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation have already started to use it as a guide when they're evaluating grant applications for infrastructure improvements, kind of trying to identify redundancies and figure out where, you know, the greatest priority or the greatest need might be for certain amenity improvements. And also, you know, having this sort of point in time baseline creates a great opportunity to be able to track progress over time. When we get into the maps that show Region 3, which is what we're discussing today, and what exists right now, you could see how this will be a great baseline to track progress against for how this improves over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So in terms of our process, we had 4 sort of immediate goals in those green circles at the top, and this is what, you know, the study set out to do. 4 things. So the first is figure out what is out there right now, exactly what amenities exist on the system, what do they look like, what are the types, what are the conditions, et cetera. And then looking at the system as a whole, the second one is identifying where there are gaps. So between 2 restrooms, between 2 picnic areas, between 2 hand launches, how far are they from each other and how far is too far? A lot of that how far is too far was based on stakeholder interviews we did to uncover what people who use the trail or represent users like to see, what they really need, what their preferences are in an ideal world. And then lastly, taking all that together to uncover needs and opportunities and places where we see sort of great candidates to enhance the trail, whether it's, a strategic location for a new amenity investment at a specific location, or maybe a global need that we saw across the trail where amenities could really be enhanced as a whole. And so those 4 project goals really feed into the broader strategic goals that are kind of all touched on in the vision statement that Mona provided. So enhance the recreational user experience, enhance the trail's sense of place, unique character, make it more identifiable. Improving amenities for people of all abilities, so making sure that this can be the most inclusive recreational experience as possible for the broadest number of people as possible. And then lastly, by encouraging more use of the trail, more broad and inclusive use, and a wider variety of users, increasing interest in the trail can hopefully lead to long-term stewardship of both trails for the next 15, 20, 50 years. For the next bicentennial. In terms of our process and our methodology, we used several sources of information that fed into our analysis. So the first, as I mentioned, was stakeholder input, and I'll go into more detail on who we spoke to and what we heard. We used several guiding documents, including Canalway's hand launch facility design guide, the Water Trail Guidebook, several other online mapping tools and sources to identify locations. I'd say the most, time-consuming and intensive part of this process was doing, on-site field data collection of every amenity that's located on both the Erie Canal and Canalway Trail. And then we used also some best practices research, whether it was related to accessibility or just other trails that we were aware of that may have similarities to inform successes and find some benchmarks. All of those sources fed into our analysis, which was primarily done through GIS and other mapping tools, as well as some quantitative analysis to identify, trends in terms of condition, gaps in spacing, get a better sense of what types of amenities exist, and then also where there might be barriers to accessibility. And then from that, identified several guidelines for spacing, for accessibility enhancements, for places where there might want to be a focus of investment, which we call hubs and nodes, which I'll talk about later. And then whether in specific locations or more broadly, where are there needs for new amenities or improved amenities. I would say, I think it was last spring. So over the course of last spring, we met with 16 different groups of stakeholders and trail users, and Mona was, fantastic in reaching every interest group or every sort of facet of canal or recreational use across the state to make sure that we were touching on every part of the trail and every type of user that we could. So you can see a list on the left-hand side of some of the, agencies or entities, as well as the types of groups that we pulled together. So this was a really successful effort. We had a ton of interest and had some really robust conversations. And I know I learned something new about paddling, rowing, bicycling, running, and boating at every one of those meetings. So it was really a great source of information. As you can probably imagine, every single one of these groups had their own priorities, their own needs that are either specific to a location or specific to a different mode of travel along the canal or the Canalway Trail. But what we heard across the board from every single one of these groups was the importance of creating a consistent and predictable experience on the trail. So diving into consistency a little more, this means, anywhere you are on the trail, whether you're in Fairport or you're in Waterford, you're seeing the same type of amenity, the same consistent maybe placement or grouping of amenities in locations where you can access the trail, and that these are all kind of maintained to a similar standard. Predictability, so focusing on the ability to, understand where you might, if you're at one location where there's a restroom and a drinking fountain and a bench or a parking lot, you're going to have a reasonable expectation of where the next place like that exists. And you have consistent and predictable wayfinding signage to get you there. So you have the ability to plan your trip, to navigate the trail in a way that works really seamlessly. And I think one of those bullet points there that we heard that I thought was really poignant from one of our stakeholder interviews is that even though pretty much everyone on the trail has a smartphone, A, that's not universally true, and B, even if you have one, it would be really nice to be able to navigate the entire trail system from west to east or east to west without ever having to pull it out. And if that's sort of like what people thought of as the epitome of being able to navigate the trail seamlessly. And then lastly, just the 3 amenities that folks said over and over again, no matter what type of traveler you are or what type of mode you're using, restrooms, drinking water, and consistent signage were those 3 critical amenities that were very consistent across user groups. Following our stakeholder interviews and kind of getting a better understanding of what folks saw as needs and sort of the existing conditions on the trail from their experience, we set out to do our inventory of the amenities on the trail. So in terms of the geographic scope, we did cover both the entire Erie Canalway Trail and the Erie Canal from Tonawanda to Waterford. So for the land trail, we biked the entire thing in segments over the course of several months and collected amenities using our smartphones. And then for the water trail locations, we used the guidebook to identify water trail access points, and then drove to those locations, accessed and inventoried amenities at that location. So we didn't actually paddle the entire canal, though that would have been really fun. But we did access all the points that people would need to use in order to get into the water or get out. For the purpose of our analysis, we broke down the trail system into 4 regions, which you can see on the screen. Last week, we did sessions focused on regions 1 and 2. Today is focused on region 3 from Fairport to Baldwinsville if you're on the water trail, Camillus if you're on the land trail, and then tomorrow we're doing a session on region 4. We have had a lot of questions both during the study and after about how data was collected in terms of how we chose and sort of drew the line between what amenities are associated with the trail and which ones are just maybe there or as a coincidence. So I wanted to sort of give an overview of how we made those determinations. Of course, it's not an exact science, but we had to, figure out some way to draw the line. So we were really focused on amenities that were A, immediately visible or in the immediate vicinity of one of the 2 trails, and B, amenities that were reasonably associated with trail use. So in the case shown on the screen here is one example, Amherst Veterans Canal Park. This is a fairly small park. The park is located directly adjacent to the Erie Canal. You can see the Empire State Trail runs directly through it. All of the amenities located here, parking, restrooms, boat launch, a pavilion, these things are all directly associated with trail use and they're immediately visible from the trail. So in this case, we would have inventoried everything in this location. In contrast, this is a picture of Parrington Park, which is just outside of Fairport. Here we have a much larger park that has, a lot of different uses and a lot of different reasons that people would come here, not just for trail use. So in this case, we sort of would divide it into the oval and green, which we call the collection zone. So this is the area that's directly along the trail, and it also has, amenities that are directly related to the trail. So a parking lot, a restroom, a dock, that kind of thing. The amenities that are further afield, the, ball courts, the playground, the additional parking, we wouldn't have inventoried any of that. I also want to note that when it came to publicly accessible locations, we inventoried those using firsthand data collection with a mobile device and a sort of survey, georeference surveying app. When we were talking about privately owned marinas or campgrounds, we did not physically access those locations, just considering, the difficulty of coordinating with every single one of those property owners to gain access to their property. So we didn't inventory them in the sense that we collected information about their condition or their specific type, but we did find the locations using secondary sources, digitize them in our database so that we could at least know the location of those and use that as a basis for our gap analysis, recognizing that even though they're private, there's still places that are used by trail users, and we wanted to consider their locations when we're thinking about places where new amenities might be needed. At the end of our inventory, we had collected over 6,500 amenities across the 2 trails. At that scale, you can kind of imagine we're not doing detailed assessments. We're not taking measurements or, looking very closely at what percentage of this bench is resting versus that one. But we did use a high-level visual assessment to get a better understanding of the condition, the type of amenity. So is this a bench made of metal? Is it a bench made of wood? How big is it? That kind of thing. And then looking at obvious barriers to accessibility. The list at the bottom of the screen is sort of a list of all the amenities that we collected. within each of these, there might have been some subcategories. So when you think of a hand launch, that probably has 4 or 5 different types of launches that we tracked. A restroom we tracked, whether it was permanent or temporary, like a porta potty. So that kind of thing, that kind of detail was built into our database when we did the inventory. And so, and we also took a photo of every single amenity that we collected. So at the end of the day, it was a high-level assessment, but I think both entities now have a very rich data set of geo-referenced locations of each one of these amenities that didn't exist before. And so now it can be a really great tool for planning and reference. So at the end of that inventory, we had, as I said, a very rich database that we could have sliced and diced many different ways. We trying to stay true to the focus of this study, one of the first things we did was take a closer look at the condition and try to come up with some global estimates or measures of condition on the trail. So we defined it in the way that it's shown on the screen. So I just want to kind of back up and say there was a trail inventory assessment that was done in 2022 for Canal Corporation. And this was looking at a lot of different assets on the trail, some related to recreation, but it went far beyond recreation, looking at things like lots of different signs, fences, crosswalks, things like that. And that study used this 3 classification type system, good, fair, and poor. And so we decided early on that we would also adopt that rating system so that we could have consistency between the 2 studies. So you can see an example on your screen of how we actually classified things that were in good, fair, or poor condition. So this example shows 3 different bike repair stations. So the one on the left has, no sign of wear and tear. All the parts are operational. It's very strong, durable, well-maintained on a flat surface that's easy to access. The second one is fair. It has a little bit of notice of wear, a less robust bike pump that's not really like commercial grade, kind of just something you would use in your home. And then the one on the right is in poor condition. The parts were falling off and rusted and didn't operate. So that just gives one example for a bike amenity. And then similarly, this is 3 examples of low docks that can be used for launching. And there are 3 conditions. So the one on the left is in good condition, no sign of wear. The one on the top right, you can see some of the tiles are sort of coming apart, and then there's sort of this very uneven surface as you approach it. And then the one on the bottom is poor, where there's a lot of sagging and bowing of the dock, and it doesn't actually, it's too high out of the water to connect to it from a paddlecraft, so that would have been considered poor condition. So this slide coalesces all of those 6,500 data points and tries to give a global sense of condition of amenities on the trail. So the chart to the very top is all amenities, regardless of whether it was on the Erie Canal or the Canalway Trail. And then we've broken them out by region. And so region 3 is the one we're talking about today. That's the 3rd one down. The second 2 charts, the one in the middle, shows the condition of amenities only on the Erie Canal. So anything associated with only that water trail. And then the bottom is only amenities associated with the Erie Canalway Trail. On a global scale, I think we were actually pleasantly surprised to see that, between 65 and 85% of amenities across the 2 trail systems, depending on the region, were in good condition. So when you think of the proportion of amenities that need investment, it's not that big. That doesn't mean that it doesn't still carry a large price tag, but I think that was a great starting point to see that we were starting from. We noticed that in regions 1 and 2, which are on the eastern portion of the state, the Erie Canal and the water trail amenities needed more investment, whereas the opposite was true in regions 3 and 4, where we saw more investment needed on the Erie Canalway Trail. And you can kind of see that, here in regions 3 and 4, we've got some larger bands of fair and poor condition amenities as opposed to regions 1 and 2 when it comes to the land trail. I also wanted to give you all a snapshot of what the amenities in region 3 specifically look like and how, kind of comparing them to each other in terms of how the condition rating shook out. And so I'll just give you a couple of highlights here. I guess I'll start by saying, so parking lots, picnic areas, benches, waste receptacles, those 4 things I think we see in this chart are, stand out as ones where there's a high proportion that are either in fair or poor condition. I'll say that that was true across all 4 regions. I think those 4 items just are in need of investment. And I think that that's good for anyone in any region to know. Among those, I think benches and bike racks we saw in region 3 for sure. Let me just try to find them here. So benches is here and bike racks are, bike parking is here. So these are 2 amenities that I like to highlight because not only did we see a high proportion that were in fair or poor condition, and this is, you know, across the board, not just in region 3, we often saw a lot of redundancy in those 2 types of amenities. So you'd have 3 bike racks sitting right next to each other. One of them is falling apart and then the other 2 are really great. We would inventory all 3. The same with benches. We inventoried all of them in a specific location. Some of them might be really in disrepair and you shouldn't use them. And it got us thinking, you know, maybe these were ones that kind of reached the end of their useful life. They were replaced by something else and they just were never removed. And so in those cases, I think that's something where all of you could kind of take a closer look at your locations of the property that you either own or maintain and say, you know, do we have redundancy here? And are there some that are in poor condition that might be detracting from the overall experience of arriving at our location along the trail? And just by removing that old or outdated bench or bike rack, could we really improve it without actually having to add something new? And then lastly, I just want to point out that in region 3, we noticed what stood out is that hand launches, I think only 40% are in good condition. So that's a really high proportion that are either in fair or poor condition. And so that should certainly be a focus of additional investigation and potential investment in this region. I mentioned at the top, we did look at barriers to accessibility. I do want to kind of preface this by saying a study of accessibility and assessment of accessibility of these amenities could be its own study unto itself with an even larger scope than this one had. What we were trying to do is kind of come up with a very high level way of identifying obvious barriers, giving each amenity a rating that could be used as a reference for further investigation. This is by no means a way to be able to come out of the study and say, okay, these 5 amenities are accessible and we can market them as such. Those are, you know, perfectly to universal design standards. They meet ADA requirements. That's not what this study set out to do, but it did give sort of a starting point for further investigation. So based on a review of the amenities that we inventoried, we did come up with some sort of case studies and best practices, and I showed a couple of examples of those from the report here on this slide. So this focuses on hand launches. The bottom left talks about designing for assistance. So our understanding of, you know, making things as universal and inclusive as possible is that folks want to be able to use these without assistance. That said, I think the reality is there are those who need assistance and prefer or feel more comfortable to access the trail with someone assisting them. And so the bottom left shows 2 examples of hand launches that we inventoried. The one on the left has a platform on both sides of the rollers so that, you know, the person launching can be on one side using the steps to get into the water, and then there can be someone on the other side assisting them. That would be much harder in the image on the right, where you do have a very large platform and you have the transfer bench to get into the rollers, but there's no space on the opposite side of the roller for someone to assist. And so this kind of shows 2 examples of, you know, both I think meet ADA standards, but the one on the left I think is a little more inclusive. And then on the right-hand side, connections to adaptive launches. Same thing, I think all 3 of these launches, if you took the launch itself, would meet ADA standards. But when you consider how to access them from a parking lot or from the trail, you can see some pretty obvious differences. So the one on the top left is in Baldwinsville. This one had, you know, a parking lot, a paved pathway to the launch, a transition plate that connects the path to the gangway, and, you know, kind of just a seamless process from start to finish. The one on the bottom was very similar, but the slope of the gangway was a little bit steep, and the lip between the platform and the gangway has some space and some uneven surfaces that could be difficult to navigate. And then on the one on the right, you have this nice concrete platform at the top, but behind that, what you kind of can partially see, not entirely from the picture, is, you know, a stone path from the launch to the parking lot. So this would be difficult for someone with a mobility impairment to access from the parking lot. So those are some considerations. And then I think all the bullets on the screen are probably things that are very obvious to folks who are on this call, knowing that you're all invested in recreational use on the trail, you've probably come across, the topics of inclusivity and accessibility, and they're very important to all of us. But I think it was still very important to us to document these in the report just to make sure that they are stated. So I think Sasha and Mona made it very clear at the beginning that accessibility is a key focus, and making this trail as accessible as possible, even beyond, minimum standards that are provided in ADA. There are ways to make things even more inclusive. And so that's something that should be a focus for new investment. I think both entities have done a lot to promote that through various facility design guides that they've published. And like Mona or Sasha mentioned, the kit of parts that they've recently rolled out, all of the amenities in that kit of parts are either accessible now or have a way to be modified to meet ADA standards. So that's really important to consider. And then something we heard from stakeholder interviews, we did do, we heard this across the board, but we did do a dedicated focus group on folks who have a background or a vested interest in improving accessibility. And what they said was that, we shouldn't be opportunistic about where we invest in adaptive launches or other adaptive equipment. We should be focusing on places where there's already a strong basis for this, and then building networks out from there. So if you have, one location along the trail where it's really easy to access the water, you have an adaptive launch, you have, a great paved path, et cetera. If you get in the water and you don't have anywhere to go to get out, that really hinders your experience and doesn't create equal experiences across all users. So creating networks where you have 2 or 3 locations all within a reasonable distance that have the similar type of amenities would really enhance that experience for someone who may require an adaptive launch or something like that. Folks also highlighted the importance of information. What is accessible and what is people are able to use is different for every person. Like there's no 2 people who I think that means exactly the same thing. So making sure that information is out there so people reasonably know what to expect when they arrive at the trail and can make their own decisions about what they feel comfortable doing, where they might want to go in order to have the best trail experience possible, was also highlighted in our stakeholder interviews. And then the last point I want to make on this is that through our interviews, we talked a lot about making amenities comfortable for all users. And this is across all abilities, across all experience levels, across all levels of ability. And so this example, which is from the hand launch facility design guide, by any standard, I think this would be recognized as a perfectly accessible hand launch. That said, if this is the only thing that's available at a location in order to access the water, there are those who cannot use the roller docks based on the type of paddlecraft they have. There are those who maybe just don't feel comfortable using that and prefer to have a bank launch or a boat ramp, and that's just the way they feel comfortable getting in the water. They highlighted the fact that a launch like this, they can't use it. And so then this location is kind of off limits to them. So thinking about pairing an adaptive launch like this with another way of getting in the water was really critical in order to make sure that people feel comfortable in every location or in as many locations as possible. So based on our analysis, our stakeholder interviews, and our data, we identified a series of best practices. These are really meant to be used as kind of in a similar vein as the entire report, as guidelines and references. They're not hard and fast rules. There will be exceptions now across the trail. There will be exceptions in the future that are made as folks consider new investments. But we did want to have some way of sort of framing our analysis and framing our recommendations. So starting with identifying the ideal spacing of amenities, I would say this was primarily driven by what we heard during stakeholder interviews. And so we based it on, for each of these amenities listed on the left-hand side, how often do people need to use these? Is it every few hours? Is it every day? Is it every couple days? And then based on that, thinking about how far people can reasonably bike or paddle or boat in that period of time, we identified some sort of rough spacing metrics. And so those are kind of listed out here, and this is a table of amenities that are shared across users. So regardless of what, craft or vehicle you might be using to use the trail, you would probably need access to all of these. And then we also broke it out by specific user types. So bicycle amenities such as bike repair stations and bike rentals, boater amenities like marinas, sewage pump outs, etc. And then paddler amenities like hand launches and rentals. So some of these have, a sort of every number of miles we'd like to see this, or a range of miles. Others are going to say something like we'd like to see this at, we'd like to see a bike repair station at every hub and most nodes, whereas a bike rental maybe would only be available at hubs. And so that's kind of all detailed in these tables. And I'll just note every graphic that you're seeing here today is also in the report. So if you want to take a closer look, you can access the report online. We also identified, came up with these definitions of hubs and nodes. And so hubs and nodes are meant to be locations along the trail where we are currently seeing, strong potential for either additional investment or just kind of like boosting these locations for recreational use. It doesn't mean that these are the only places where there would be any investment in the future, but it was a way for us to focus our analysis and our recommendations. So hubs and nodes are very similar in type, but I would say different in scale. So a hub is larger, tends to have proximity to a major center of activity. It'll have strong connections to both the Erie Canal and the Canalway Trail, and it'll have a higher concentration of amenities, and there may be a higher variety of amenities as well. So amenities that could be used by experienced users, casual users, long distance travelers, short distance travelers, all different types of modes. A node is going to be a little bit smaller in scale. Maybe rather than a major downtown, it might be located in a park or at a lock or something like that. It will still have a strong connection to the trails, and it will still have some concentration of amenities that makes it a convenient and logical place for people to stop and rest or, use services along the way. Within hubs and nodes, we came up with some guidelines for priorities to include amenities at each of these locations. So you can see again, hubs are going to have a larger number and a wider variety of amenities, whereas nodes may have fewer and a smaller variety. We prioritize these. We initially started with this as like, oh, it's like priority 1 is a must-have and priority 2 is a nice-to-have. And that framing wasn't exactly right. I think the more we thought about it, we don't want to create any sort of, like I said, hard and fast rules. So this is really meant to be used as a guideline. I think you all know your locations best and know what's really needed by the users that you encounter every day. So take this for what it is and however it helps you. But I'll just give a couple of examples. Thinking about restrooms, for example, when we're talking about permanent restrooms from our stakeholder interviews, it was kind of thinking about consistency and predictability. It was important to have a permanent restroom at every hub. It would be nice to have a permanent restroom at a node, but a lot of people said that a temporary restroom, a porta potty, as long as it's clean and well maintained, they're happy to use that. So that was kind of considered a high priority for nodes, but less so for hubs. So those are sort of how we made some of those determinations. And then we get into the really fun part, identifying needs and opportunities. So I'm going to start with those that are specific to Region 3, which again is from Fairport to Baldwinsville or Camillus, depending on where you are. So in each region, we identified hubs and nodes and defined them on a map, located areas where there are gaps in amenities, where it was too far between two amenities for people to reasonably travel. And then within those gaps, where are there locations for investment to improve the experience for everyone? I don't want to beat a dead horse, but again, this is a guideline. It's not to say these are the only locations or the only types of amenities that are going to be invested in or that are going to be a priority. It's really just meant to be a reference. I think everyone on the call agrees that any investment along the trail is going to help users, regardless of where it is. Excuse me. So this is our map of Region 3 and the identification of hubs in the larger yellow circles and nodes, the smaller pink circles. So I will note this is, of the 4 regions, I would say this is one of the more remote, more rural regions among the 4. And so it was definitely one of the more challenging ones to identify hubs and nodes, especially in the eastern portion where you go, Montezuma and further east. On the west, I think there was a pretty strong concentration, and that's sort of reflected in the number that you see on the west versus the east. So the hubs are located in Fairport, Newark, and Baldwinsville. And then we have several nodes located kind of between those to bridge the gaps. Two locations I want to point out in particular here are not necessarily a specific location, but kind of between Montezuma and Baldwinsville. This is one of, I'm probably not a surprise to any of you. You're probably all nodding your heads along. I can't see your faces, but extremely remote and very kind of an amenity desert. We identified this location, the Mentz DEC boat ramp, as a location where it's easy to access and has a good launch, but no other amenities. Without an amenity investment along somewhere in this area, the distance from here to here is really difficult for paddlers. And so if there was a simple investment like a restroom at this location, I think that would go a long way. But this is hollowed out because we're considering this a potential node at this point. I don't think it really rises to the level of a node without some additional investment. And then similar for Jordan Erie Canal Park on the Erie Canalway Trail. I don't think there's even a restroom here, but it does have, I think, a bike rack and is a location, a type of scale, and a type of park that we would see as a great candidate for a node and would certainly fill the gap between Port Byron and Camillus. So again, a potential node here. This map has a lot of information on it and probably takes some time to digest, but it does give you a really great snapshot of exactly what amenities are located at each hub and node, and maybe more importantly, what's not located there. So anything that is in sort of a dark, bright color is something that currently exists. Anything that's grayed out does not currently exist. And then anything with a red circle around it means that there was an amenity of that type in this location that was in poor condition. So we didn't want to discount it completely, but we did want to highlight the fact that, hey, this is here, but it probably needs some additional investment in order to make it truly useful by trail users. I'll note that, in some of these locations, there might be more than one. So maybe there's one bike rack in Macedon that's in poor condition. Maybe there's another one that's in better condition, but we wanted to highlight the poor condition one on this map. And so you can see, and if you look at the report, I think you'll notice comparing this map to maps of a similar type in other regions, there's more that's grayed out in this region than in other places. And then this next series of maps shows, regardless of whether it's located at a hub or node, where are the key amenities that are critical to all users located along the trail. So these are shared amenities, which we refer to as restrooms and drinking fountains, only associated with the Erie Canal, so the water trail. And I would say restrooms are pretty well positioned here on the western portion. There's a 30-mile gap here between drinking fountains. There's one in Fairport, and then there's one at Lauraville Landing, which I believe is just outside of Clyde. Between that, there's about 30 miles. That's sort of not out of our sort of accepted range, but it is on the upper level. And so we tried to identify places where there are current permanent restrooms, like those are in dark blue shown on the map, that if those are permanent restrooms that are plumbed and have, access to potable water, they may be candidates for installing a permanent drinking fountain. So those are the types of opportunities we tried to identify as sort of low-hanging fruit. I recognize that drinking fountains are one of the most difficult things to install along the trail. So it is sort of a sticky wicket, but just want to highlight some of those opportunities. And then on the eastern portion, we see a 30-mile gap between restrooms. I think I kind of highlighted this on an earlier map, but that's a pretty long way for a paddler to go without ever being able to get out and go to the bathroom. I think Mentz could be a potential candidate to improve that situation. These are the amenities that are specific to paddlers. So we're talking about launches and paddlecraft rentals. So on the western part of this map, we have a pretty good network of adaptive launches and paddlecraft rentals. Something we heard from stakeholders is that those two things pair really nicely together. So an adaptive launch may be marketed as something for those with a mobility impairment to use, but it's also a really great tool to access the water if you're someone who just has never kayaked before and you're not really comfortable getting in the water. This makes it really easy to do so. And so if you're thinking about places to have rentals, those are going to be things that are used by new users, people who are less experienced. And then so having an adaptive launch and a boat rental together makes a lot of sense. And I think probably in part thanks to Pete, we have a good system of that starting to form on the western part of this region. We felt that, and kind of based on our analysis and our conversations with stakeholders, that it would be a good thing to strive for, to have boat rentals and adaptive launches at every hub. And then where you have an adaptive launch, maybe you add a boat rental. Where you have an existing launch, maybe you add an adaptive launch. And then two, in places where you have launches that are in poor condition, if they need to be replaced anyway, maybe that's an opportunity to add an adaptive launch. So we see that in Macedon, at Abbey Park, and this I think was another boat ramp or boat launch. It might be the Brutus boat launch, if I remember correctly. And then the last thing I'll note on this slide is that in Baldwinsville, you know, for those of you who are familiar, that is a fantastic location that has excellent amenities for boaters at the marina, excellent amenities for paddlers at Mercer Park. But those two things are, you know, some distance from each other, not too far to walk. But I think some wayfinding signage at that location would really help bring paddlers to the showers and the restrooms that are located at the marina, especially if you're going on a long distance trip. This is a map of boater amenities. So here we're talking about public and private marinas, as well as sewage pump outs. This was true throughout the entire trail system, that boater amenities seem to be pretty well positioned. We did not see any major gaps, especially having spoken to a few long distance boaters who said, you know, I only need these things every few days or maybe once a week. I mean, a marina, obviously you need every day, but a sewage pump out maybe a couple times a week. Fuel maybe once or twice a week. So we just kind of didn't see any obvious gaps, which is not a bad thing. I think that's a good thing to know. Doesn't mean that these places don't need maybe potential improvement or could add additional amenities, but I would say the foundation is certainly in place. These are the shared amenities on the Erie Canalway Trail. So there's probably some overlap between this one and the Erie Canal if there were amenities that could be used by both trail users. It's a pretty similar story. So 30-mile gap between drinking fountains, opportunities for portable toilets, like at Jordan Erie Canal Park, where we could turn this into a node if it had a restroom. And then similarly, just identifying permanent restrooms where a drinking fountain could potentially be added. And then lastly, bike amenities. So bike rentals, bike repair stations, and bike parking. Bike parking is actually in pretty good shape in this region. We did see some locations where, you know, hubs that lack, we only have 2 hubs in this region, Fairport and Newark. So Fairport has a bike rental, a bike rack, and a bike repair station. It'd be great to see all of those 3 things at every hub. And then it'd be great to see bike racks and bike repair stations at, you know, all or most nodes as well. All right, I'm gonna take a sip of water really quick. That was stuff that was specific to Region 3. The next section talks about things that we saw across the trail system that could be enhanced more globally. So the first is kind of talking about ways to maximize amenity impact. We know that there's limited funding available. Budgets are tight for investing in new amenities. So how can we take what we have right now and make it more useful to a broader number of people to maximize sort of return on investment? So 2 things that stuck out to us from our observations were locks, marinas, and campgrounds. So locks and marinas, understandably so, are kind of geared more towards boaters, larger vessels. For paddlers, they can be kind of intimidating experiences. So if you're, for example, coming up to a lock and you don't really feel comfortable locking through, especially if you're right up alongside some very large boat, but you don't see an obvious way to get out of the water, to portage around the lock, simple signage, making something that's highly visible so people know where to go and get out, and then kind of keeping those trails maintained would go a long way to make people feel more welcome as they, you know, sort of embark on that journey. And then I think kind of staying in the vein of locks, we know that locks are a key resource for camping because a lot of them allow people to camp on the land next to the lock. These are often not located in major centers of activity. We definitely noticed sort of a lack of sense of arrival when you get there. There's often not like an obvious sign that says, yes, you can camp here. here's what you need to know, here's who you can contact if you're in trouble. Something like that, I think, would make people feel more comfortable. And just some of the sort of gateway amenities, like having a bench, a sign, a garbage can, all in one place next to the campground, I think would help a lot, especially thinking about consistency. And then similar to Locke's talking about marinas and key comfort amenities like showers, laundry facilities, these we noticed tended to be geared towards boaters and maybe located in places that boaters are likely to see them, but paddlers or bicyclists may not. So again, signage is a pretty low level investment that could go a long way to letting people know, for example, Mercer Park in Baldwinsville, when you get there and you want to come out, if you walk, a quarter mile, there's a shower and a laundry facility there. And I think kind of more broadly in the same vein, just thinking about places along the trail where people are coming into a town or village or coming to a place where they might want to stop and rest, focusing on making those places feel as welcoming as possible and creating a stronger connection to the trail could help to enhance the entire experience. I think that's especially true in this region where it is rural, it is more remote. I did bike a lot of this region, and I remember feeling like I'm on the trail, I'm not seeing anyone or anything for a really long time. Am I still in the right place? Like, am I just all alone out here? And then every time I came to a town or a village, I just had this like huge sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, like I'm here, I'm in civilization. So anything you can do to sort of strengthen that feeling even more, I think would help users. Staying on the sort of the wayfinding thread for another moment, I mentioned early on, this was something that was really important to all stakeholders. These are some of the sign types that they felt should be a focus of investment. So on-road trail markers, I think we're pretty hamstrung in what we can do to improve these, but they did note that they see some that are missing at key decision points. Again, this is governed by MUTCD, which is a very large document that dictates exactly where signs on public highways can be located. But I just wanted to document it as a challenge for some users. Mile markers, I think, were noted as being very inconsistent along the trail. In some places they exist and they're very formal and they're very useful. In other places they're informal or they don't exist at all. Again, with so many trail owners and maintainers along this very large system, linear system, that's not a small ask, but that was something that was noted as could help a lot with trip planning and decision making. And then water trail markers, which are meant to identify for people who are on the water, this is a location where you can stop and get out. At the same time, they're really useful for people who are on land to figure out, okay, this is a place where I can go and launch my boat. So seeing that sign consistently, maybe not only located near the water, but also located near the parking lot or near the road could help as well. And then I think Sasha noted this early on, in terms of destination signage, there's a wide variety of types, colors, amounts of information throughout the trail system. We also, this kind of gives a sense of condition. There's some that are covered up by sort of overgrowth. There's some that have been vandalized. So I think what Canal Corporation is doing to make this more consistent will be really helpful. What folks said is that the sign on the bottom left where it says Lockport and Rochester, a direction, a location, and a distance is really what they're looking for. Like that is the right kind of amount and level of detail for information on these types of signs. And then when you are arriving at a destination, such as, a downtown or something like that, people are looking for signs like the two on the left. So signs that give general directions to general locations like a business district or back to the trail. That's kind of the level of information they need just to have a reasonable level of confidence to know, okay, there's probably a restaurant here. There's probably somewhere that I can make a phone call or get some food. Maps, I think, would maybe be more limited to locations where people are going to stop and rest for a long time, where you might be actually like hanging out to do some exploring. But they are a helpful resource as well, so I don't want to discount those. So the end of the report does identify a number of next steps that were initially geared towards Erie Canalway and Canal Corporation, but I think they are broadly applicable to anyone who is an owner, maintainer, or stakeholder in the trail. So those are listed here on this page, and there's a lot more detail in the report. Coming up with a plan for, and this report can certainly help with that, for understanding what you have now and what you need and how you're going to get it. And then also preparing associated cost estimates and identifying how you could potentially fund those improvements. Sasha's going to talk in a minute about funding opportunities. That's kind of having that plan and having an understanding of what's needed and how much it's going to cost is a key first step. Engaging with community partners. We did that at one point in time during this study. But as I said earlier, you're all, much more in tune with your specific communities and with what they need and what you think would work and why. So I think continual engagement with people who are coming through your town or your area is really important. Doing a more detailed accessibility assessment of, doesn't need to be a hub or a node, but at a specific location, kind of saying, okay, yeah, we installed this adaptive launch. That was great. How do you build out from there? So how do people get to that location? What else is around them that is accessible? And how do you sort of build that broader network within a specific location on the trail? I think that could be a focus of future study. And then incorporating signage and amenity design standards where those are applicable. If you're considering new investments, I would strongly encourage you to consider those guidelines, that kit of parts, if it's applicable to your location, if it's canal property. And then lastly, I think we recognize there have been some great successes with private partnership where people are offering bike or paddlecraft rentals, whether it's a manned location or self-service. We'd love to see that expanded throughout the trail. There's definitely a lot of gaps. So looking for opportunities to do that as well. And then lastly, I'm going to pass it off to Sasha for funding opportunities, and then we'll kind of open it up for questions.
Great. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Great presenting, Leanne. So yes, I want to talk about funding opportunities because all of this is really great, but how does it get done? And, certainly installing some benches or launch sites maybe isn't a financially super costly project. However, I know that local governments are strapped for money, and the good news is that there are opportunities for funding support and partnership. And so the first two that I'm going to mention come from the New York State Canal Corporation and also in a partnership program. So the first one I'll mention is our smaller grant program, but it's still impactful. And it's our partnership grant program with Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor. And it's our New York State Canal System grant program. In this grant program, it's a competitive grant where we offer funding for tourism infrastructure and amenities improvements, as well as events. So those are kind of two separate pockets of funds. On the screen, you'll see the breakout of maximum and minimum funding amount for each. The objectives are also up on the screen, and eligibility is for local governments, not-for-profits, and also recognized Native American tribes. It's worth noting that this year we're placing additional emphasis on accessibility and also addressing services and amenities identified in the gap analysis. And the enrollment period is coming up very soon, October 14th, with a deadline of November 27th, and we'll award sometime early next year in February. That's our time frame. On the tourism infrastructure side, this program is unique because it doesn't require it to be a capital improvement project. So, for example, you could use a rental company to provide a portable water fountain or portable toilets. That certainly would satisfy something, as long as you could prove that it promotes tourism and recreation on the canalway. We've also had applicants successfully apply and install maintenance equipment sheds so that they could purchase new mower and have a house for it. So these are really intended to address community needs on a smaller scale. And we see this grant program as being a really great opportunity to address likely the nodes that are identified and also the gaps that are identified. So it doesn't have to be a large scale municipal park that you're applying for. It can just be meeting some of the gaps that are addressed in the report. We also allow in-kind contributions or in-kind services. So if your community is using staff time to install, let's just say, a bench and a water fountain, you could use that as your match requirement, which is a 50% match requirement. So this is, oh, and one other note is that because we have this focus on accessibility, we are hosting 2 accessibility workshops in 2 weeks on September 14th and 18th. One of the workshops will be focused on tourism amenities and infrastructure, and then the other one will be focused on events. I'll send a link to those workshops in the meeting in the notes. And then next, we have our larger grant program. This is our Canalway grant program, and the program awards up to $1 million annually in competitive grants for canal-related capital projects within the canal corridor. And it's part of the state's consolidated funding application process, which means you can apply for multiple state grants at the same time through a consolidated process. The minimum funding amount is $25,000 and the maximum funding amount is $150,000. And this grant also requires a 50% match. A unique feature of this grant program is that we allow you to match this grant with other state grant funding. So many state grants do not allow you to do that. So that might also make this grant program enticing. It's the same eligibility type as the previous grant program. And a great example, this would be a great program to apply for if you are looking to establish a trail hub or a small municipal park along the canal system. Once again, these are capital projects, so we typically see larger scale infrastructural improvements come through this grant. And we're in the process of reviewing the 2025 grant round applications now, and we'll award in January. So because these are somewhat larger scale projects, I'd say think about what you would like to see occur in your community. And certainly you have about a year to advocate and move towards applying for the grant, which typically opens in May with a deadline sometime in July. Because these are consolidated grants, we announce them sweeping across the state for all the agencies, and the governor usually announces them. So stay tuned and we'll certainly get the word out when those grants are ready. And then I want to mention other grant opportunities that are offered through the state for similar types of projects. So there's the Environmental Protection Fund grant program for parks, preservation, and heritage. That's offered through state parks, also for larger capital improvement projects. There's also the Municipal Parks and Recreation Grant Program. Those are for municipally owned lands. And I would say that this is a grant program that would be really great if you have trail or canal adjacent property and are looking to establish a hub or a node. The Recreational Trails Program is a federal funding, but it's administered through state parks. It's highly competitive and it's offered every 2 years. But certainly if you're looking for land-based trail and transportation alternatives types of projects, this is a great grant. Higher dollar values associated with this program. And then lastly, on the state side, there's the Department of State's Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, also once again for larger scale capital improvement projects, but certainly a really great program. We've seen a lot of local waterfront revitalization program grants get matched with our Canalway grant program. So certainly just you can play around and think about options there, all within the same time frame and all within the same consolidated application. And then lastly, sometimes I pass it over to Mona here, but there are other opportunities. So there's not-for-profits who provide funding for trail and waterway recreation oriented projects. So Rails to Trail Conservancy is a national non-for-profit who offer funding opportunities. You're out towards Western New York, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation has been a large funder of tourism and recreational funding projects. And Mona, do you want to talk about the last two? Great,
sure.
Thank you.
So these are just examples of different types of funding. There are other federal and nonprofit sources. The two for the Trail Grants Program through Athletic Brewing Company. that grant is intended for trail maintenance, waterway protection, urban, green space improvements, invasive species removal, beach cleanup. So that's 2 for the trail. And then there's also a boating infrastructure grant program that is available through Boat US. It pays for docks and amenities for visiting boaters so that they can stay overnight, for overnight dockage. And boaters and manufacturers fund the program through excise taxes and duties. So that's another, potential opportunity for your community to look into additional funding sources. The website, it's administered through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So the website is just parks.ny.gov. I can put it in the chat before we finish up. But it's through their grants and boating infrastructure website or web page. So again, there are many additional funding sources. These are just examples. If you, Google something for trail assistance or trail amenities assistance, you'll see a lot of things come up. So I think all
these
that's
are
it.
linked, right, Mona? They're all
Yes,
linked
they
to the
are.
presentation, and you're going to
Yep.
post the presentation.
They're also linked. Yep. So we can open it up to, questions, and I'm just going to put the website on the chat for that Boat US grant program. Does anybody have any questions for either me, Sasha, or Leanne? Okay, looks like we have a couple that have raised their hands. So Tracy, do you want to go ahead first? And if you could just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Sure. My name is Tracy Murphy. I'm the director of Historic Palmyra. We have 5 museums. Our little mantra is five museums, 1 destination. And I'm wondering, I've had some thoughts of possibly developing a visitor center about a block away from the canal. We're located on Market Street, which is just a block from the canal itself. And we see a lot of bikers and boaters, and we do a lot of the school tours that involve the canal and Lock 29. And I'm just wondering what kind of opportunities are out there, not only for us to possibly get some funding. I mean, I got some great ideas with the funding, and I'd like to work with the village and the town, but I feel like Palmyra would be a great hub if we could get it together.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I'm not looking at the report right now, but if your community wasn't identified as being a hub or node, that certainly does not exclude you from pursuing establishing the amenities that would be expected or anticipated at a hub or a node. It was just simply based off of what exists today and kind of that criteria for mileage between necessary amenities that helped dictate which ones were identified. Palmyra certainly would be a great hub or node. And I think like Erie Canal National Heritage Corridor and Parks and Trails New York could also be really great advocates for helping your community identify partners, funding support, and also writing support letters for you if you are able to, work on applying for different grants. So I highly encourage you, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to myself or Mona.
I'll just add to that is, Palmyra is identified as a potential node location in the report. So, based on amenities that are already available, this funding can also, allow you to add additional funding. So in addition, there's capital funding available through Canal Corporation, maybe that's something that, you can kind of put several grants together to be able to achieve what you're thinking about.
And one other question was Swift's Landing. There was no mention of that. That's in East Palmyra, so that's like that's in between Port Gibson and, well, Newark, Port Gibson, East Palmyra. I know I think there's bathrooms there. That's probably the only amenity, but is that something else that the trailway could look at to possibly put in some other amenities? I mean, it's a pretty active park. Unfortunately, Wayne County, we don't always get the best reputation, and we get, unfortunately, some people that like to destroy the property. So I feel like sometimes it's hard to keep those things up. But I feel like we're in a weird position because Newark has their nice visitor center with the amenities and for the boaters and everything, and and then it's kind of like it fades out a little bit until we get into like the bigger city areas. And it would be, really nice, I think, personally, because I'm all invested in this visitor center. But I just think it would be nice because we could include everybody, boaters and bikers and people that are just visiting, and and we know from a standpoint of having the 5 museums here that we get a lot of tourism. But we're a small staff of 3 people, so it's kind of hard to go out and capture people all the time. But I'm wondering, like between that Swiss Landing and the Palmyra Aqueduct Park, if we could do something to improve that as well. And that's all. I'm sorry.
And I think we see that in a lot of communities. Like, yeah, Palmyra Aqueduct Park was identified as a node because it does kind of have everything you would need right there, and it's so close to Main Street. And I think you just have to kind of look at all of those as like great foundations to continue to build on. And I think at the same time, like the canal can't do everything for everyone. It really has to be sort of this concerted effort between investing in the canal and investing in the community as well. And so I think it sounds like you have sort of a great foundation. You're getting, good tourism base from the visitor center or from the museums. And maybe, a visitor center in addition to that could continue to attract. And then that in concert with, additional investment in amenities could all kind of work together and kind of catalyze revitalization.
We had another question from Joanna.
Hi, this is Jonna McCooey. I'm at the Fairport Office of Community and Economic Development in Fairport, New York. And first, I just wanted to say thank you all 3 for this great presentation. And I want to recognize the effort it must have taken to do this broad and deep data collection of every spot we have and every bike rack and the state of every bike rack and all those things. So thank you so much. My question is about beyond the presentation, and thank you for sharing that. Is there a more detailed view that we might get specific to our community? Like somewhere, is there like a punch list in Fairport? Like, here's what's good, here's what we found, here's what might be missing for you beyond just what's represented here in the city.
So the report does go into more detail than this did. And so it'll have a narrative of each hub and node and describe, what we saw as available there, what we saw as potential opportunities. In terms of like at every location, a detailed assessment of every amenity at that location, that level of detail is not in the report. But I guess Mona and Sasha, you can jump into, but I would say take a look at the report, see if what you need is there, and if not, you can always follow up with Mona and Sasha for more information.
Yeah. There was a conditions assessment. So yeah, if you're like looking for specific data points, we could dig into that a little bit more and help out.
I would say just based on our observations, there wasn't much that we thought that Fairport needed. You guys have done, you know, and I talked with Pete a lot about the history of everything that's been invested in there. And it's really comprehensive. So I think you're doing a great job. And we certainly highlighted Fairport as a sort of a model for other communities in the report.
Thank you. It's, as you're well aware, like an ongoing process to continue to like upkeep, maintain. We get like a great new thing like the accessible kayak launch, and then look over at this bank and go, wow, this stuff is really kind of worn and can be improved and rehabbed. So we are working to try to keep doing that and want to make sure we have the right focus from a priority perspective. And this is a great help to doing that.
Does anybody have any other questions? Well, if you think of anything after we conclude today, you can email or call either me or Sasha. Our contact information is on that last slide. I don't know if you can
I'll
pull
throw
that
that
back up.
Back up. Yeah, give me 1 second. There we go.
Yep. So yeah, if you think of anything, feel free to contact us. We have one more session tomorrow for Region 4. And as Sasha mentioned, there are 2 accessibility workshops or presentations coming up later this month on the 14th and the 18th. So we'll have more information available on those. So anyways, thank you again, everybody, for attending. I really hope that this will help you with your future grant applications and, you know, just thinking about like what you could, you know, what you can do for your community and to make the trail a lot more enjoyable for all of all the visitors, tourists, and residents. So
I think, Mona, I think Jonna had her hand up again. I don't know if,
Oh,
Jonna,
she
do you have
did?
another
Okay.
question?
I do not have another question.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry about that.
All good.
all right. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.